Major funding for these broadcasts has been provided by grants from New York Community Bank, Capital One Bank, Eastern Consolidated, M&T Bank, Sterling National Bank, Meridian Capital Group, the Witkoff Organization, Customers Bank, Ariel Property Advisors, Chase Commercial Term Lending, Chase Mortgage Lending, Perfect Building Maintenance, Genova Burns. Additional funding has been provided by AKA Hotels, Corman Communities, AmTrust Title Insurance Company, AVR Realty Company, Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, Bank Leumi USA, Briarwood Organization, CBRE, Citizens Bank, Cohen Equities, Colliers International NYC, Collins Building Services, Connect One Bank, CPEX Real Estate Services, Dime Community Bank, Douglaston Development, Levine Builders, Flushing Bank, Friedman LLP, Handro Properties, Handler Real Estate Organization, HAP Investments, Hodges Ward Elliott Inc., Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Center at Syracuse University, Kilroy Architectural Windows, Madison Realty Capital, Matone Group, Mercantile Bank, New Banks, Newmark Grubb Knight Frank, Optimum Window Manufacturing Corp., People's United Bank, Polsonelli, Rosewood Realty Services, SJP Properties, Stonehenge Partners, TD Bank, Terra CRG, the Knackle Group at Cushman & Wakefield, Maring-Goff Family Foundation, the Moynihan Group, and these friends.
Warsaw, Poland. Traveling around Europe. I'm going to become an economist. I'm going to go to Colombia. I'm going to work in the Grand Union Hotel. I'm going to work for Republic National Bank, Merrill Lynch, other ones, Lydian, an investor, an economist, a businessman, a philanthropist. Andrzej Rojek. Thank you for being here.
Pleasure, thank you.
So tell me about your maternal grandfather.
My maternal grandfather was a genius. He graduated with a degree in music composition and conducting from a Berlin Philharmonic. He also had a degree in civil engineering. He was an inventor.
What did he invent?
He invented, for example, lights, little light battery lights for the Polish military before World War II. He had a little factory in the outskirts of Warsaw where he experimented with all these things.
And he was the first notary republic?
No, that was his father.
So tell me about his father first.
So my maternal great-grandfather was probably the first Jewish notary public in Warsaw. This goes back to 1890.
Right, but the notary public is not the same as a notary public here.
No, the notary public at that time was essentially a lawyer and a judge. In a sense, every contract written had to be written. He had to write a contract. He certified the veracity and validity of the contract and then signed it. So the act establishing the largest synagogue in Warsaw is signed by him. And he took education in St. Petersburg. At the time, there was no Poland. This is end of 19th century. So you either were educated in Russian or in German. He was educated in a Russian system in St. Petersburg, came to Poland, established an office, and did a great job. So then was also crazy about theater and had his own theater at home.
So his son, your grandfather,
yes,
you were saying was an industrialist.
Was essentially an engineer, inventor, and a musician. Played quartets at home with his wife and his friends. Was very disappointed because I have no musical ear. And I remember to this day when he sat me at the piano, I was maybe 5 or 6, asked me to play a few tunes, and I couldn't.
At the onset of the war, your grandparents basically changed their names, they changed their religion. What happened in Poland at that time?
I think this is the time, say September of 1939, Germans invaded Poland. I think it was obvious to them that being Jewish is a risky proposition. And my grandfather did a number of precautionary moves, if you wish. They changed the names, they established Christian credentials, they got the baptismal certificates from the church, which still exists, and the books of these certificates still exist. That allowed them to survive. Obviously, they never went to the ghetto.
But what happened? Did they maintain their property, or did they lose their property?
The factory was bombed during the fight over Warsaw in September of '39, so it was only partially rebuilt. So I think I'm not sure, but I think they supported themselves basically selling whatever assets they had.
Your grandparents, they survived the war. Were they in the ghetto?
No, they did not go to the ghetto. They, unfortunately, a number of times were blackmailed when they had to pay off people who wanted to report them. Towards the end of the war, when the Warsaw Uprising started, they ended up in the forest outside of Warsaw. But they never went to the ghetto, and they never went into. They lived through the war in Warsaw.
But what happened to their 2 daughters?
My mother and her sister were were involved in underground activities of various sorts, and were caught by the Germans, arrested first in a camp which was inside Warsaw, which was called Pawiak, and then they were sent to Ravensbrück in the northernmost part of eastern Germany, if I can say that, where they spent almost 3 years and survived, and they worked in a munitions factory. Which was pretty horrendous work, because you basically were all around lead, 24/7.
Now, but they subsequently were able to get to Sweden.
Yes, there was a rescue operation by a Swedish Red Cross, which in January and February of 1945, during the winter, when Germans already were pulling out and Russians didn't yet get into the camp, the Red Cross was able to take, if I remember correctly, 15 or 17,000 of women. This was a women's camp. They had what was called white buses. And in these white buses, they drove them through Denmark and then on a boat to Sweden. And essentially, they were brought back to life in Sweden, because they were all in very, very, very bad shape.
Now, your aunt stays in Sweden, and your mother comes back to Poland.
Yes.
Tell me about your father's side, and then we'll get to how your mother met your father.
My father's parents were Calvinists, clerks. My grandfather worked for the municipality, and my grandmother was a librarian. And they both worked and lived through the war. My grandfather was found killed on the street in 1940. No one knew what happened, no one knows the story. And my grandmother died in the 60s, and I knew her very well, obviously. And my father was arrested relatively early and sent into a labor camp where he worked through the war in Germany on the farm.
Your mother, who's now returning from Sweden, how does your mother meet your dad?
They worked in the same newspaper.
Right. You said to me your dad went to law school, correct? And he was a writer, and your mother was also a writer.
Yes, she's graduated with a degree in history.
Right, and now they're living in Poland at this time, which is communist.
Deep communism.
Deep communism, and they are working together, and now she's a proofreader.
She's a typist.
She's a typist, but he needed a special eye.
My father was a fresh eye. Fresh eye was a job which basically included getting up at midnight, going to the printing shop, and reading the whole newspaper from A to Z. And this was like the last check. last proof that everything is okay. And my mother missed a letter typing. Instead of demilitarization of East Germany, she wrote remilitarization of East Germany. And my father missed it. So next morning, there's a meeting of the whole team. They had to stand up and deliver self-criticism, basically apologize to the team. Subsequently, they were fired. This is, like I say, deep communism, mid-50s. So they went to a bar, and here I am.
So you're born in 56. Now, your parents retired early. They had to retire early also.
They retired relatively early. They retired in the late 60s. At the time, retirement age in Poland for what was called victims of Nazi crimes was 55. So my mother retired at the age of 95, and my father retired at the age of 60.
And they were able to get reparations?
Not really. My father didn't even try, and my mother got a very small sum from German Red Cross. In 1967-68, Poland was undergoing a little bit of an anti-Semitic campaign. And at the time, both of my parents lost jobs. And my mother decided to retire because she was already 55, and my father took a very basic job. Still in the broad world of journalism, he was essentially his job was to read foreign newspapers and point interesting articles, which could then be translated into Polish. But they essentially checked out and started their own life. My father started writing history books.
Now, you said to me growing up, the communism was so strong, and also Europe, that when you were growing up, your class went one day to Auschwitz. What happened?
Yeah, in the 7th grade, we had a mandatory trip to Auschwitz, and my mother wrote a letter to school saying that I will not go.
But you told me that the students were told that 6 million people died, not Jews.
At the time, when you visited Auschwitz, in the 60s or 70s, when Poland was, like I say, a communist country, you were told that this is a place where 6 million people died from 20 nations. There was no specific mention, these were specifically Jews, or these were, 90% of them were Jews, or anything like that. That's how the story was presented. And my mother's argument was not necessarily, Jews or not Jews. She did not want me to see a camp. And she thought that's, and she never talked. My mother never ever spoke about what she lived through. And I could ask 10 times a day, she would never say. Neither did her sister.
What is life growing up in communism until you're 17, 18?
Pretty gray, right? Basic supplies are there, but standing in line is a normal part of your daily routine. So sometimes I'll get back to school and go stand in line to buy some stuff, whatever we needed for home. You couldn't travel, by and large, except for so-called Eastern Bloc. So let's say you could go to East Germany or to Czechoslovakia or Bulgaria, Hungary, but that was basically it. Your information was restricted. We have 2 TV channels and essentially 2 or 3 newspapers. To catch and view or understand what's going on in the world, you would go to American Embassy, or you would go to a British Council and read newspapers when and if they were available there. Obviously, the books, when and if they came from the West, or they were smuggled, or they sometimes were translated. That was a great source of information. But there was a little bit of a chase of information. You wanted to know what's going on out there, and you're not always. It wasn't easy.
Now, when you graduated high school, you said to me you wanted to go for economics.
Mm-hmm.
Before college, you had to go to the military, correct?
Traditionally, when you graduated from high school, there was a mandatory military service, right? And you would go, if you didn't get to college, you would serve 2 years. If you would get to college, you would serve a year. I got to college, but I am colorblind, so...
No. Tell the story. I think the story is interesting because You were drafted as the.
You get a little piece of paper, and it says that on Tuesday at 8 you have to show up at the some gray building, and in this building you will be drafted. So I showed up, and everything gets measured and checked and so on and so forth, and then there's an eye test. And I see very well, but there is this test which has all these colorful dots, and inside the dots there is a letter or a number, and I don't see it. I really do not see it.
You really did.
I really do not see it. But the examiner, the military examiner, doesn't believe me. So she pulls out a red crayon and asks me what color it is. I said brown. And that got me a so-called D category, which disqualified me from military service. I still had to go to like a light military training at college, but I did not go to
Well, what kind of light military training?
Well, light military training was, I think, was a half a day a week. We basically had to learn about bombs and guns and gas masks and so on and so forth. And we were told that at some point we may have to shoot Americans, but Russia will help. That was basically the story. And women, for example, who were not drafted, all women had to go. So I sat with women at these classes.
You're in Warsaw, going to college. How many years were you there?
4.5 years.
4.5 years, and you get your bachelor's and your
Masters.
Your master's.
We do not have, at the time we didn't have bachelor's.
Right, so you get your master's degree, and then you told me that you were able to travel with $100.
At the time, every Pole could go to a bank and ask to buy $100. It was a pretty expensive proposition, but you still were able to do it. So here you have $100. Then you apply for a passport. You have a passport. If you have $100, now you can go and get a visa. For example, in the British embassy or Swedish embassy or French embassy. And you had to prove that you have means of supporting yourself abroad. So this is $100. And based on this, you were given a visa. Maybe a month, maybe 3 weeks, maybe whatever. And that allowed you to do, that was this small opening of the borders, which allowed us, meaning here we are, 20 plus, were able to travel. And that was just a spectacular opportunity to see the world.
With the Europe on $5 a day.
Europe on $5 a day was a very hot book. There was Fodor's, if you remember. Fodor's published these books, Europe on $5 a day. And you realize that if I can go there and I can eat pizza and stay in a youth hostel, I may survive on $5 a day. And I traveled, so you sleep at night in the train. And then during the day you do sightseeing and so on and so forth.
So you finished your master's and then you try to get to America to a degree. How long did it take you to get?
Three attempts. The third time, now it's 1981, and we have solidarity in Poland, so the borders are a little bit more open. And I was able to get, obviously, a visa from American government because I got an internship, or actually scholarship from Columbia, but I couldn't get a passport. So the good news was that in 1981 I got a passport, I had a visa, and I came to Columbia in August 26, 1981.
Now, August 26, 1981, you come to Columbia, but they don't have housing for you, correct?
Yeah, well, they were allocating housing based on how far you live from campus. So I was thinking, I have good chance.
Warsaw is very far.
Warsaw is kind of far, right, compared to other students who applied for housing at Columbia. So I show up in a real estate office at Columbia, line up, there's a few guys ahead of me, and I get into the office, and a woman called Rose says that she's very sorry, but she doesn't have a housing for me. And that was pretty devastating news, because where am I going to go? Soon enough, Rose was fired and went to jail because she was a little bit corrupt. And I did get housing, it just took me a couple of weeks.
Now, so you're going for your additional courses, and you were a teaching assistant, so you were earning...
I was initially a teaching assistant. After martial law was declared in Poland, I realized I cannot go back. There is no communications, right? The phones don't work, the mail doesn't get through, nothing. We don't know what's going on. So I went to Columbia and asked whether they could help me. So my fellowship was essentially converted into graduate studies. And because I had no money to pay tuition, I was a teaching assistant, unpaid teaching assistant essentially, and that allowed me to get a master's, my second master's.
But it helped you. And how did you get the job in the hotel?
No, the job at the hotel was at night.
Right.
So I worked at night in a hotel, and I went to Columbia during the day. The hotel was on 32nd Street, and it was sold room by the hours.
You finished Columbia when?
86.
So it's 1986. Our young economist, the Polish Warsaw Poland economist, gets a job at Republic National Bank. How'd that come about?
As easy, as simple as it gets. There was an ad on in the Department of Economics blackboard, and they were looking for junior economists, and I applied, and I got a job. I had a few interviews there. It was a spectacularly interesting bank. It was run by the Safra family. They were probably the world's largest bank supporting foreign exchange offices. So they needed cash. They needed cash in numerous currencies. There was no euro yet. So they wanted to know the country risk. And my job was to assess the country risks wherever they were dealing. So it was a very, very interesting job, but I realized quickly that it will take me 10 years to become an officer of the bank. So I started looking for a job and left Republic after a year.
And then?
Then I went to a small British brokerage firm called Creswell. There I worked up until the crash in '87. And the crash basically wiped the firm out. And I started working at Merrill Lynch in early '88.
But at Merrill Lynch, you changed your career. You're no longer an economist.
No, I was not an economist anymore. I became an analyst, stock market analyst. I worked there for 2 years, changed job again, went to Bankers Trust as a trader, actually. And, Bankers Trust, I still believe, was the best bank in the world. And I worked there pretty much until
Deutsche Bank.
Germans took us over. Yeah.
And then you went...
Then a few colleagues of mine and I established a hedge fund in the summer of '99 after the German takeover, Deutsche Bank's takeover, and we ran the fund until 2010, and it was a very, very good experience for us, and we really enjoyed that time, and I realized that this is great to start a firm. So.
Tell me how you met your wife before we get to some of your photos.
My wife and I met in 1975, so this is really prehistoric times. She was a girlfriend of my good friend, and in Warsaw, yeah. And we met one day and decided that this is it, and ever since we're together.
Tell me about the children. You have a son and a daughter.
My son is 33, works for a sports company called Paragon Sports, and is married, has a 7-month-old daughter called Zosia, and his wife, Caroline, works at a media design firm for corporations, and my daughter is studying sports management at NYU.
So tell me how you got involved with this Karski.
Colleague of mine called me a couple of years ago and said, Karski died and no one remembers. Karski was a Polish emissary working for the Polish underground government during World War II, traveling between occupied Poland and the government abroad, first in Paris and then in London, reporting, carrying news. He was truly an emissary. Because of his phenomenal memory and language skills, he was particularly suited for the job. He was caught during his second mission, escaped in a very harrowing circumstances, and his third mission involved first studying the Holocaust. He went to the ghetto twice. He went to a transit camp which sent Jews to Treblinka and Belzec, and they went with all this news and his direct reporting to the Allies. He was essentially a first eyewitness of Holocaust who came to report on Holocaust to the Allies.
So he started in Germany?
In 1943, he went through Germany to London, reported first to the British government, obviously. Churchill did not want to see him. Anthony Eden saw him and basically ignored him. He saw a number of intellectuals and politicians and artists and writers in England, but the Polish government decided that he has to go to America. So he gets sent to America, sees again members of the government, Felix Frankfurter, Robert Morgenthau, and ultimately sees Roosevelt. Roosevelt listens to his report about Poland, about this secret state in Poland, the underground state in Poland, and about Holocaust. And as we found out later, didn't really do much. Indeed, had a long meeting with Karski. Karski is this 27-year-old, great-looking, tremendously outspoken Polish officer, yet doesn't impress Roosevelt that help is needed. So then Karski travels around America, writes a book, Story of the Secret State, which essentially was designed to be a movie screenplay, but Hollywood didn't buy it. Finishes his PhD in politics at Georgetown and teaches in Georgetown, and really does not talk about his story until late 70s, early 80s, when Claude Lanzmann decides to produce Shoah, which is probably the best film ever made about Holocaust. And Lanzmann discovers Karski, makes him talk. Then Karski becomes a little bit better known. He died in 2000 at the age of 86. So we took upon ourselves to kind of bring Karski back to people's memory, to people's realization that there was this guy and certain values, and the Yad Vashem medal and the Israeli citizenship was granted to Karski in late 80s. So no, we can take responsibility for the Presidential Medal of Freedom. That was 2013, if I remember correctly. It was, tremendous event at the White House with President Obama. At the same group was John Glenn, Madeleine Albright, and Shimon Peres. It was a spectacular group of people that received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and we were really excited that America chose to honor Karski, and essentially from that on we started the foundation.
And the mission of the foundation today?
The mission of the foundation today is really to spread the word about Karski, the way he lived, the certain values he followed, and the fact that you need to report. You need to report on people who can't talk or people who are not being listened to, schools, colleges, Poland, U.S., anywhere we can, we go.
So the kid who could have stayed, your aunt was in Sweden, lived her life, you might have gone there, you became the economist, and you became a trader and became a philanthropist. And thanks for being here today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much.